All right, folks, this is a tutorial on how to use OBS, Open Broadcast Software, to record the projects that you've been working on for our seminar. So I have opened up OBS. This is currently version 31.0.1. And normally if you open this up after having just installed it, it might give you a prompt about whether or not you want to be streaming or recording. I set things up to record. You get better quality on your recordings that way. And I have a few things set up here which you won't have. You will just have something called scene. Now, this is also typically going to be true for the lab computers at school, but if anyone has already gone and set up a scene or changed settings in one of the computers, they will be different when you are trying to do this. So it's always a good idea to check some of these settings as well. Okay, so the first thing that I do when I set up a new OBS or I sit down at a lab computer is I go over to settings. That is going to open up this window where we're going to check a few things. First off, we're going to look at output. And if I scroll down here to recording format, typically MKV is what the default is, and I advise you to not use MKV. I advise you to use MP4. MP4, the MPEG-4 version of it, is the best way that I have found to make your videos as compatible, as widely compatible as possible. So please set that up as an MP4. You shouldn't have to deal with any of the other settings, but you do want to look at your recording path. Now, if you're working in the lab computers, it is highly recommended to try and save things on the D drive, which is usually set up as student work. I like to go ahead and set up a folder called capture on the D drive, but there might already be something there. If you're working in the game art space, there's typically already a folder and it's already set up in this recording path. But if you're working in other parts of the school, you're going to need to really specify this. If you're working on your own computer, I highly recommend being very, very deliberate about where you set this recording path. It's usually best to set it on a secondary hard drive where you don't have your operating system, but put it where you can find it is the most important thing to think about. Okay, so if we have that all set up, that's perfect. The other thing that I like to do is go into hotkeys, and I like to set up my start recording button as page up and my stop recording button as page down. The nice thing about this is you don't have to pull up OBS and have it be on screen when you start recording if you do this. If you minimize OBS and just have the presentation or whatever it is you want to record on screen, you can just hit page up, page down. I also always recommend that you do a quick test, like a 10 or 15 second capture to make sure everything's working. And you can also make sure that your page up and page down buttons are working properly this way. The last thing we want to double check here is video. We want to have our canvas set to 1920 by 1080, and we also want our output to match that. And somehow on this machine, it looks like that isn't the case. So I need to make sure that my output is 1920 by 1080. This is HD quality. Some of the machines at school are able to do above HD quality, but HD quality right now is a great standard setting to be utilizing for your recordings. 30 frames per second is going to be fine unless you're doing something like a video game that is very quick moving, in which case you might want to consider turning this up, but I would recommend recording at 30 frames per second and testing how it works before increasing it. If you turn this number up, the size of your file gets much bigger, much faster. Okay, so I'm going to say okay when those things are set, and now I'm going to go and set up the actual thing that I'm trying to record. So you should have something called scene, and if you click on that, you should see no sources. If you click on scene and there are sources there, it means someone's already set up that computer in the lab, and you might want to go and click a add scene and create a new scene for yourself. I find that if I'm working in the lab computers, I will often give these scenes names that respond to my name so that I know when I come back to that machine that this is the one that I had set up. Okay, so if you're just starting out for the first time and there's no sources, you can hit the plus. And typically what we want to do is try and do a display capture. If you're trying to capture a game, sometimes display capture will not work properly, and you're going to want to experiment with window capture and or game capture. If you've got problems like that, maybe leave a comment, ask me in class, send me an email, I'll help you out. But typically display capture is going to work. I like to then name what the display is. So this is my right-hand side screen. And I'm going to say OK. And then it's going to ask me which display I actually want to capture. And the display I want to capture is the one on the right-hand side, which is going to be corresponding to this HD60S Plus, which is my capture card. Okay. I do want to capture my cursor so that if I'm pointing at something, it will show up on the recording, and I'm going to say OK. All right. So now I can see this red frame is perfectly fitting on the screen. If you have a situation where you have these stripes, it means the resolution of the screen is not the same as the resolution of what you're trying to capture. So rather than just resizing this, you might want to double check, right click on your desktop and say display settings. And you might want to just do a quick check what the resolution is on that screen. I always find it's best to work at the same resolution that I'm trying to save as, because otherwise things that look correct on my screen, like fonts that are readable, when they get downsized might no longer be readable. Okay, so once I'm all set with that, I'm going to go ahead and click this button, start recording, or if I've set up my page up and my page down keys, I could hit page up to start recording. And it looks like I'm recording in the spot where it doesn't allow me to, and then I would hit page down to stop. I would do that for 10 seconds, and then I would just do a quick test to make sure that it's working. Okay, that is the basics of how we get set up with OBS. If anyone has any trouble with this or any questions, let me know. I'm always happy to walk you through this again in person if you're one of my students, and I always do my best to answer questions if you leave them in the comments. Good luck, and hopefully you can do a lot with your amazing recordings out of OBS. Cheers.